We are the Keyboard Samurai, a podcast focused on sharing insights to help those working in cybersecurity companies, be them technology or services. Each session, your host, Wil Klusovsky, aka Wil Klu, sits down with professionals in our industry to illuminate topics that will help your security biz, team, or self be better. Let's hack into it now. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode. I think they're exciting, maybe, to some people. Today, finally got Philip on. We've crossed paths a number of times across multiple other podcasts and presentations and events and stuff. So it's great to have you here, Phil. Give everybody the 30-second of who you are and why we care.
Sure. So I'm Philip Wylie, an offensive security professional. So I've worked in the offensive security side for over a decade, over 21 years in security overall. Prior to that, I had a 6-year career as a system administrator in IT back during the .com boom. So that, as well as I'm a teacher. I've used to teach at Dallas College. I taught pen testing, web app pen testing, and I continue to teach workshops at conferences. Mentoring and helping others are a big passion of mine. Frequent conference speaker, and some of the conferences I've got coming up that I'm looking forward to is Melbourne, Australia in November, Hack the Hills. Ryan Williams, that does the hacking magazine out of Australia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's putting that on. So I'm one of the keynotes there, and I'm back speaking at Black Hat, Middle East and Africa in December.
That's outstanding. And you're in Dallas now, so doing all that traveling?
Yes.
Or do you do? Oh,
yes.
That's great. I have yet to go to Australia, even though one of the companies I work for that was like one of our largest regions. Just haven't made it out there. I'm excited for you, though. That should be cool.
Thanks. It'd be my first too. And one of the things I didn't mention also is I'm also a podcaster and the author of the Pen Tester Blueprint.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's exactly why. Like you're industry famous for us. So that's how I like to put it. We have all these folks who like you who are just kind of like, running around everywhere, doing a lot of good things, educating a lot of people. I think it's interesting. I do want to add, because it's interesting. You mentioned you teach web app testing, and when I look at, I guess, in the current landscape of today, if I look back, say 15 years or so, maybe even a little longer, when my teams were doing pen tests, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that we were going to own the organization we got into, usually in a matter of hours, if not in faster time. But I'm hearing now that, or I'm starting to see now that that's not necessarily the case. Or actually, I guess that's my question to you. Is that still the case? Is it still like, hey, when we do a pen test, we're going to find something, we're going to get in? Or have organizations kind of step things up and it's a lot harder and more, I don't say more valuable, but it's not a foregone conclusion anymore?
It's a lot harder. And one of the kind of things that kind of proves that it's gotten more difficult was the assume breach style of pen test, where you've got credentials and access to that network or that system that you're pen testing. Because what was happening was these consulting companies or internal pen testers were coming in, doing the pen test, couldn't get a foothold, write up some minor, vulnerabilities that they found and kind of document how they tested. And that was the end of it. And so someone down the line had this brilliant idea, say, let's do an assumed breach, because, you really have to worry about insider threats, credentials that get leaked from, some of these breaches. And sometimes people just don't store their credentials safely, use default credentials. So one of the things that they weren't taking into consideration prior to assumed breach was the insider threat kind of perspective, which assumed breach does. And I'm a big fan of it, because you don't want to go in and someone can't, you might start out a black box approach without credentials to see if you can, find anything that could be exploited to gain a foothold. You definitely want to start out that way. But I think adding credentials and doing an assumed breach method is definitely needed, so you can thoroughly test the systems. We've done this for years for web app pen testing, because you don't want to just try to do it as a black box threat actor approach, because especially web app, it's hard to get any kind of system control and stuff. And so for years, they've used credentials to test applications, and now it's gone to infrastructure and cloud and so forth. So I think it's really a necessary evil when you're having pen tests performed these days.
Yeah, I use it to sort of validate the risk register a lot of times too, because we all have kind of the standard ransomware, compromise, all that stuff. And it's like, well, because you have to have that assumed credential loss. Because you said you don't, if I can just fish that from somebody, right? I don't have to deploy malware. Just if I can have a fake page and grab credentials, now I can find a way to log in. It's like, okay, now I have this, low level, non-admin person, what can actually happen, right? And I remember back in the day, like you mentioned, the organization be like, I'm black box test. I don't want to tell you anything. And I'm like, okay, but you're going to pay me to find out stuff that like you could have told me, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah,
like the best thing is to tell us everything you can, and then we can
definitely.
validate that and don't waste any money on that. And like,
Yeah,
let's get started with what can be done.
yeah, it's tons more reconnaissance and enumeration that has to be done to find that, because I've had pen tests that I've done that for before, doing a consulting side gig for a friend, that this company wanted a black box approach. So the only thing we had was the physical address of their corporate headquarters, because they wanted physical security tested. It was up to us to do all the reconnaissance and stuff to find the items. And one of the things that I found during my testing was, sometimes you've got a scope that's defined, which you really definitely need a defined scope. But even if I would have had a defined scope from these people, using Shodan, I was able to find an FTP server in Indonesia that wasn't any of their network blocks, any of their IP subnets or anything. I was able to find through that. And so the more time you have to spend on reconnaissance, the less time you've got to do the testing, and things are going to be missed. So the more information you have to start with, the more thoroughly it can be tested, and that way things don't get missed during the pen test.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of stuff too, and as we've kind of in the last, I guess, 7, 8, maybe 10 years, maybe less, we start talking about attack surface now, and you see organizations that like, well, because the whole black box thing is, well, this is where I'm at. How can you get to me? And now it's like, well, what do the baddies see? And it's like, oh, well, there's this company that you M&A'd 5 years ago, and they have a misconfigured cloud server just sitting out there with a bunch of data that you technically own, but because you didn't bother to look for that company name that you've changed by then, like it's there and you're still responsible for it.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that, and just you mentioned the mergers and acquisitions, and in banks are notorious to have so many mergers and acquisitions. I've worked for banks before, and I worked for a mortgage company that this mortgage company really grew through acquisition. They bought like a bunch of different other mortgage companies out. And one of the things too is always bringing them up to parity, because some of these companies, and notoriously back then in the mortgage industry, whatever the business groups wanted, the people that were making the money, they got what they wanted. So you had a lot of shadow IT and just really poor security that put the companies at risk. And there was times that they would acquire other companies, and it just kind of let them run things the way they wanted to. So mergers and acquisitions, that's such a big risk.
Yeah, I've had a couple of clients in the past where we had to create that whole, hey, we know you're a business. That's your business. You buy and sell companies. So when you're doing that, you need to assess them, like and then because some of them they'll be like, oh, we're going to buy these and we're going to integrate them. So how do we do that? So like, what are we getting ourselves into? Like, so what's their security footprint look like? Some we know we're just going to keep for a while until we can sell them for more money. So okay, well, how do we make sure they don't hurt us? And just sort of creating that standard approach to it. And most of the time, the CISOs aren't involved till after the purchase is done too, at least in my experience.
One of the best things I've seen, and I'm not going to really mention the company name. I was interviewing with a company a while back, and they had a offensive security team, a pen test team. They would do red teaming and pen testing against possible acquisitions. They had to go through these tests, and that's a good thing, because there could be cases that it's not worth the money to implement security, bring them into your IT infrastructure. Sometimes it's not worth the risk, and these things need to be weighed. So it's definitely something that people want to do when they're looking at these companies, is look at the risk, because they may be making money, but what happens if you get in there and you get breached on account of now your networks are connected, your infrastructure is connected, and someone's able to get in through them and pawn the whole enterprise.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen, and you get to see like, okay, well, they have this SIM and we use this SIM, and they have this EDR and we have this EDR. And then all of a sudden you go through like tools rationalization, and now it's like, well, okay, which one are we going to keep? Which one are you going to get rid of? Or is this one is good enough? Like there's, and I'm sure they think about that to some degree, but I feel like that's probably like a line item and less of like an assessment part of it. Cause I've had the conversation where, like you said, let's do the security assessment before we buy them. And then we can go in and like that effectively affects our price too. Like, sure, you guys are making X amount of money. If we buy you, we're taking on X amount of risk. So let's lower the price.
Yeah, that's a great point. Definitely something that companies looking to acquire other companies ought to, consider that, because if it's going to cost this much to get them up to the level of this company, then it's definitely something to negotiate with, because who wants to take on all that headache, acquiring a company. So I think that's an awesome idea.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. So pen testing aside, what other sort of passions do you have around the cybersecurity space?
Yeah, I like to help other folks. So that's really what got me into teaching, because I got into teaching back in January 2018. I taught at Dallas College. And one of the things that did for me is I really changed my focus, because prior to that, I've always been a competitive person. I used to be a power lifter, and I worked a sales job one time in jewelry sales. And I'm always competitive, trying to push myself to be the best version of me or beat other people. And then when I got the opportunity to teach in 2018 in Dallas College, I kind of thought, and I never claimed to ever been one of the best pen testers. I did my job well. But one of the things I was looking at is trying to be at this, level, maintaining that, staying up late after work, trying to learn new skills and all this. And I just really thought, the world needs more teachers and coaches. That's an important role. And that's been life-changing for me. So I taught at Dallas College for over 3.5 years, but I continue to teach workshops and do mentoring and stuff. And so that's one of the reasons I started my podcast, because one of the things I do is I ask my guests to share their hacker origin stories. And them sharing how they got started is very motivational to people that are trying to break in. And that was something I learned from teaching my class, because at Dallas College, I would share some of my experiences from pen test and different tools and things I've used. I'd do demos and I would just share my experiences. And my students always loved the stories. And they said, "Hey, could you bring in some of your friends from the community to share their stories? This is very helpful stuff." So that's been in the back of my mind since starting my first podcast, The Hacker Factory, and then went on to do a solo thing, the Philip Wylie Show. And that's one of the things I've always kept in mind. And back in the very first Hack Space Con back in 2023, a couple showed up at the conference because I was teaching a workshop. The husband was a listener to my podcast. And whenever he stepped away, she said, "Thank you for doing your podcast." That, he was going to school to be a security engineer. He was a construction engineer at the time, and he was looking to move into cybersecurity. And she said, "There's times that your podcast motivates him that I can't." And so just hearing that is one of the things that keeps me going, because there's times you kind of do it and you kind of think, "Man, am I, ready to be over with this? Because I could have all this free time to do this and that." But it's just like every time you're at a conference, someone comes up and said, "Hey, I was listening to your podcast when I got my start," or "You really motivated me." Hearing those stories just kind of keep me going, because as long as people are getting good out of my content, finding something useful and it's helping them, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
That's awesome. I always say I wish I could pay my bills just being a mentor. There's nothing better than being able to just kind of help people out and give them whatever guidance it is that they need. We've been doing this long enough and have some perspective to be able to kind of give that back. That's outstanding.
Yeah, back to the whole mentoring thing. It's just, there's so much you can help a person, because when you got to learn it all on your own, there's so many things that you've got to learn, and you're able to help people get up to speed sooner. And I think it's really kind of a responsibility, if anyone can spare a little bit of time, if we're really serious about our security on a global scale, we really need to help the people that are trying to break in, help encourage them. Because, one of the things I kind of experienced back in my IT days is gatekeeping. We had, you had the Unix administrator or the developer that wouldn't share their secrets because that was their job security. They felt like if someone else could do that, they could be replaced. And so I think it's good that I see a change, that people are starting to get past that. And I think that one of the best things you can do is help people. Because one of the things when I made that change in focus from, my personal career to help others, was, when your personal success, you can only do to so much, but the more people you help, the more successes you can experience. And it's a better feeling to me if you help someone land that job compared to maybe you got this certain certification or
Mhm.
you learn this certain type of hack. It's so much more rewarding. And one of the things I like to compare it to is I'm a former competitive powerlifter, and I used to help people with their workout routines, help someone get a personal best on their bench press. They would appreciate it, but that wears off after a few months or year or so. But if you're able to help someone land their first IT job, security job, or their first pen testing role, that's stuff that's life changing and sticks forever. So it's a lot bigger impact than what I was gaining from helping out in other ways.
Yeah, that's the what's the "You're not a leader till you make another leader," right? That
Yes.
old quote,
Yeah.
yeah. So being able to produce, I know in on sort of my career, like, those are the moments that I'm proudest of. It's like being able to move into another position and having had somebody ready to go, or, I helped a couple people transition who weren't in cybersecurity at all, but they had industry knowledge. I'm like, dude, this is great because you're in manufacturing or you're in healthcare and you don't realize how valuable that knowledge is. And here you move over. And yeah, the idea that, I mean, I think things are a little different now in the education space than when you and I were coming up. But I remember a long time ago, I think it was the director of the NSA said we needed to stop requiring college degrees for pen testers because good pen testers aren't going to college. Like you said, you're spending every day down in the basement, like learning new things. And that was my experience in consulting for so long. Is our pen testers were good because they lived it, breathed it all the
Yes.
time, right?
Yeah. One of my proudest moments of helping someone else was I was working for this global consumer product company. I was the red team lead there, and we outsourced some web app pen testing. And I had two of my students, former students, working for a consulting company that were doing the pen test. And to get those email replies and to see that these two ladies were helping out was pretty amazing. And what else was even more cool about the story is you had, your more traditional type of person that's just broke into pen testing, that's kind of younger, early to mid 20s, and you had someone else like in their late 40s, early 50s, seeing someone that's been through being a stay-at-home mom that had the degrees and all this stuff, took a back seat to raising a family, and she was back out in the field, and she had gone to Dallas College. She had degrees already, but she was like taking DBA courses, development courses, really not finding what she was interested in. And she took my pen testing course, learned it really well. And one of the things that's interesting, and to share with the listeners, anyone want to get into this, my students that got pen testing roles and that were the most successful were the ones putting in the long hours in the labs at school, learning the hands-on piece, reading the lessons and all this stuff, the methodology, all that's important, but the hands-on experience is very helpful. And so, like I said, the ones that were successful were the ones that put in a lot of hard work. I mean, I've had some students that it was a little more difficult for them, so they put in
Mhm.
tons of hours to pick it up because it took more time for them to learn. But yeah,
Yeah, it's it's tough. It is one of those areas where you have to, like, I've never been a pen tester. I understand it conceptually, and I loved having conversations with my pen test team and, like, getting validation that I understood what was going on. Like, I was like, "Okay, so this thing does that," which meant if I wanted to do this, like, yeah, I couldn't push the buttons and make it happen, but at least, like, but that conceptual knowledge was great for, my roles and things like that, but to actually be able to do it, you've gotta have the time on hands on keyboard. You gotta go in there and see how it works. You gotta freaking really dig down into it, and having the, I mean, nowadays there's way more available for us to be able to do that. Not versus way back in the day when you kind of had to literally just do illegal activities to learn how to prevent illegal activities.
yeah. And that's the nice thing about nowadays, because you remember back years ago, whenever someone would get busted by the government, but then they would let them out if they come to work for
Get
them.
hired.
Yeah. Back then, that was the only way for them to find hackers, or pen testers, was to find, convicted cyber criminals and say, "Hey, you want to pay your dues?" And so now there's educational opportunities out there where people can learn, to have to go through that. But another thing I love too is people can learn how to do that And there's opportunities like bug bounties and some of these different learning platforms that people can learn this without having to break laws to get that experience.
Yeah, I did a couple of when my kids were younger and did like career day and stuff. I would always like bring that up, like the industry. I'm like, hey, you can go make money right now. Like you're in middle school, it doesn't matter. Like go learn how to do this stuff. You find bugs, they're gonna pay you. Like, you know, you can make 10 grand if you find a good one, you know, stuff like that. I was like, get started now. So
that reminds me of a very funny story. There's this one of the local elementary schools. They had like I think it was a fifth grade career day, and I got invited because one of my former students, his wife worked for the school district, was in an administrative role, and they invited me to come to career day. And it was kind of funny when I told them I was an ethical hacker. One of these kids went over to the law enforcement booth and ratted me out, say, hey, that guy's a hacker. But I thought, good thing he saw something, he reported it. So, but it was just kind of funny that, you know, he didn't realize that I was doing this for good, but then went over and reported me to the police officer.
That's one of those things we have where marketing has screwed us, because the term hacker was never meant to be a bad person, right? We have to constantly remind everybody of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things I try to, when I teach or give presentations on pen testing, always like to distinguish the difference, because I mean, it's funny when you tell people I'm an ethical hacker and they'll say, is there such a thing? I mean, it's like, you know, a lot of other things. I mean, yeah, there's other skills that you can have that could be dangerous. You know, or you consider this not ethical, or there's no way to do that ethical. But it's interesting. Just the media has really kind of beat that into people's heads that, you know, hackers are cyber criminals, and that's not always the case.
Yeah. I won't go down the rabbit hole of other terminology that they have forced down my throat at this point, but it's all good. Yeah. So Phil, this is great, man. I could chat with you forever, but if people want to find you, where can they look you up and get in contact, or get some info from you?
Sure. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm also on X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram and TikTok. And you can find my podcast on YouTube, The Philip Wylie Show, as well as I recently launched a new podcast for Simply Cyber called Simply Offensive. That's over on their YouTube channel. And you can find Simply Offensive or The Philip Wylie Show on your favorite podcast platform.
That sounds, are you doing that with George on the
this is just, well, it's for Gerald Auger runs it.
Gerald, but I'm sorry, I meant Jerry. That was the word.
It's for Jerry, but I'm solo hosting it.
God, awesome. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, see you, Phil.
Thanks for enjoying Keyboard Samurai Podcast. If you'd like to engage, find Wil on LinkedIn at /Wil Klu or visit at wilklu.me. That's WILKLU.me for more info. Disconnecting now. Synac you later.